Politics is an inherently contentious and polarizing subject because we humans all want things, but rarely do our desires align with everyone else's. Often we label people based on where their ideas fall on a political spectrum, fitting somewhere between the left wing and the right wing. On the right you have people who identify as conservatives or libertarians, and on the left you have progressives, liberals, or socialists, with many more micro-targeted political identities spanning across the spectrum. Those on the right generally manage to find common ground and work together to effect the changes they want, while those of us on the left are currently and historically almost entirely incapable of working together and coming to agreements on just about anything. The US presidential election of 2020 provides a great analogy of our modern political landscape and the dynamics between people on the political spectrum within the United States and abroad. In the lead up to the election, the right-wing Republicans wholeheartedly backed the incumbent Donald Trump. Any Republican who spoke out against Trump was ridiculed until they rescinded their comments and fell back in line. The more left-wing Democrats still had to choose a nominee to lead the opposition against Trump, with 29 Democrats competing in the process to fight for the nomination. Throughout the entire election process, left-wing voters were split between numerous candidates who they believed best represented their values, creating divisions among voters each time someone dropped out or failed to do so in order to pave the way for their own nominee of choice. Bernie Sanders voters were angry that Elizabeth Warren didn't drop out and give her support to him once it was clear she wasn't going to win. Joe Biden voters were mad that everyone else wouldn't just settle their differences and give their support to the candidate they felt was best equipped to beat Trump. And everyone was annoyed that Michael Bloomberg qualified to be in the race at all, considering all he did was sink $188 million into cringy political campaign ads. Eventually, Joe Biden became the clear nominee, and while most of the other candidates dropped out and gave their support to him, many voters are still disillusioned by the sheer chaos of the entire process and may well give up on voting in future elections. The end result was a left wing divided a countless number of times, with Joe Biden only barely beating Donald Trump, mostly thanks to Trump's low approval regarding his COVID response rather than the nation's unyielding love for Joe. Why is this the state of the left? Why is it that we can't agree on anything long enough to gain political power, while those on the right are consistently willing to work as a group? Let's explore why this keeps happening within leftist groups and maybe, just maybe, see if there's a way we could work together long enough to get a few of the things we want. While leftists all over the political spectrum fight amongst each other, conservatives rarely feel the urge to question their political allies. The 2016 US election saw a similar dynamic on the Republican side with regards to choosing their leader, with 17 candidates in the running for the nomination. However, even though the voters and media figures had their preferred candidates at first, as it became clear that Trump was going to be the nominee, they all retracted any previous negative statements made against Trump and got behind him in full force. The unified Republican Party went on to win the presidency, with voters, Republican leaders, and media figures all in lockstep with Trump and his agenda, then focusing their energy towards fighting against political opposition on the left. Conservatives typically value loyalty above all else, so even if someone on the right feels that their values aren't being represented by a leader or group, they are still compelled to support them no matter what. Those on the left, unfortunately, have no such inclinations, and immediately scrambled to point fingers towards who they felt was to blame for their defeat, rather than reflecting on what made the right so strong in this election. We often see this trend of blame shifting amongst lefties, whether it's in politics, the media, political groups, and especially online. The reason for this is very complex, yet very simple. The conservative movement is dedicated to preserving the status quo, and therefore tends to resist any form of political change that people on the left advocate for. It's far easier to unite on the grounds of not doing anything, or stopping those you perceive to be your enemy from doing anything, which leads to the reason the left can't coalesce around a common goal. People on the left desire change, but what everyone wants varies greatly depending on the values each individual holds. There are liberals who are generally open to some social changes and promote increased civil rights, diversity, and inclusion, but are terrified to make too many changes for fear of rocking the boat. Liberals also happen to be the leaders of most left-wing political parties in most Western nations. Then there are progressives, who strongly push for many social and economic changes that would benefit minorities and working-class people, but may have little or no desire to move away from our current capitalist economic framework. And finally, you have socialists, who usually want many of the same social changes that progressives do, but believe we need an entirely new economic system in the form of socialism if they have any hope of affecting the changes they want. Many liberals believe voting to be the most important and sacred act a citizen can perform, and if we just keep voting for more liberal leaders, eventually things will turn out okay. Some socialists still believe it's important to vote, while some believe it's a waste of time, but most of us agree that it's far more effective to organize protests, strikes, and unions to pressure leaders into making the changes we want. Progressives may fall on either side of this argument, but can often be inclined to vote and attend protests. Liberals and socialists are constantly at odds with each other, because many liberals think socialists are crazy radical idealists whose goals will only ever fail and make the left look bad, while many socialists think that liberals are so lukewarm in their political ideals that they can be persuaded to believe just just about anything, making them nothing more than useful tools for political leaders. This leaves progressives somewhere in the middle, often being labeled liberals by socialists or being labeled socialists by liberals. But you'll also see socialists labeling socialists not socialist enough because they don't conform to their personal view of what socialism is. The insistence on labeling each other means that we often never get around to discussing what we actually want, which is, well, everyone has their own specific agenda. After all, we do live in a democracy, making it difficult to even find a starting point when pushing for political change from the left. This is made even more tedious when the politics someone advocates for are closely tied to their personal identity. Someone who is a member of the LGBTQ community will likely have both political and personal ties to issues regarding that cause. And if they feel their concerns aren't being heard, they may refuse to support someone who doesn't sufficiently help their movement. Someone whose core concern is environmental protections will probably be sympathetic to a fight for civil rights. But their main cause for engaging in politics is going to differ from someone primarily concerned with immigration reform. It is somewhat inevitable for people's political opinions to be formed around their identities to some extent, but successful politics requires that we work alongside people we disagree with and make compromises on certain issues in order to progress the movement as a whole, which is something the left still doesn't seem to understand. Just to be clear, this doesn't mean we need to work with people who are ideologically opposed to our existence. Jewish people do not need to feel compelled to find common ground with Nazis. The issue with people so closely linking their identities to their political opinions is that any argument against their positions doesn't feel like a political disagreement. It feels like a personal attack, which then prompts them to counter with their own personal attacks rather than engaging with the actual issues. My experience is that many on the left are more concerned about projecting moral superiority than discussing the finer details of how to implement social or economic policies, with much of the discourse on the left devolving into a pissing contest to determine who is the purest lefty. On the right, however, it is far less common to find instances of people accusing each other of not being conservative enough, though the issue of vaccinations has somewhat changed that dynamic. This is obviously incredibly counterproductive when trying to cultivate unity within a movement. But what does this mean for people who are on the fence? A lot of people don't really follow politics, don't really consider themselves to be affiliated with either side, and don't have fully formed political views. They may hold opinions that people on the left consider incorrect, problematic, or even abhorrent. We're all products of our environments, so many of our political beliefs stem from our upbringing and from the people we spend most of our time with. Someone who grew up in a racist or a homophobic family will adopt many of the opinions that surrounded them, even if they may otherwise be a good person. Lefties often feel a primal urge to call out any behavior they deem to be wrong, which may be positive in a case of someone being overtly racist to their friend, but in many cases this just ends up being a barrier to productive conversations. If people feel like they're walking on eggshells whenever they speak to someone due to fear of being labeled a bigot, they'll be far less inclined to come to an understanding of the other person's point of view, or even discuss politics in the first place. Or even more consequentially, may dissuade good potential political candidates from attempting to run for office. Giving people the benefit of the doubt increases the likelihood of a substantive conversation, because if we assume everyone who expresses a view we disagree with has bad intentions, we automatically start to see them as an enemy rather than a potential ally. If we're always primed to pounce on someone if they say the wrong thing, we're more likely to attack people who might otherwise be sympathetic to our views if we were to engage with them in good faith. The line between calling out injustice and contributing to cancel culture is becoming increasingly blurry, and often serves little purpose aside from offering some temporary validation to the person who decided to get mad about a celebrity's old tweets. Now don't get me wrong, some people are bigots and deserve to be called out for the things they say, but in my opinion, attempting to get through to people who hold problematic views is far more productive than constantly searching for a reason to dogpile on them. Not only does this create a toxic environment for political discourse centered around emotion rather than actual issues, but it results in a countless number of potential missed opportunities to win people over. It's rare that shaming someone will convince them that your opinions are correct, and is far more likely to push them towards your political opposition. If those of us who hold left-wing values desire political change, we need to recognize that labeling everyone is entirely counterproductive. Politics is a spectrum. It isn't just left, and it isn't just right. Someone can be progressive on LGBTQ civil rights, but heavily conservative on issues of economics. It serves no purpose arguing whether a person is on the right or on the left, or on the other left. And the need to put them in a specific box diverts away from a substantive conversation about policy. We're always going to have disagreements on what policies to push for and the strategies we deploy to achieve them. So instead of banishing anyone whose ideas we deem to be not left enough, we should engage in healthy debates to determine what the majority believes to be the correct way forward. The only way the left can start winning is if we remove emotion from the politics and work through our differences to build a united platform that is capable of mounting a serious opposition to established powers. So I implore everyone, get out there, have disagreements, have debates, talk to people with opposing points of view, but never lose sight of the core issues that we all fight for, and be excellent to each other. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you like this video, please press the corresponding buttons which indicate that is the case. I linked a few videos about the same topic in the description, so have a look at those too if you like. Bye!